And welcome back to 1550 Today. I'm Paul Roberts, and my guest today is Jesse Appell, who is a comedian and a Newton resident. And Jesse, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And where are you calling me from?
So I'm calling you from Newton right now, but I'm actually only here back on, ironically enough, I'm on vacation back at home, because I live in Beijing right now and do comedy in China.
Oh, okay. Now, how did you find out that you wanted to be a comedian? I think to be a comedian, you have to be a special kind of person. And I always say the best comedian is someone that also has a very serious side to themselves.
Yeah, I think that it's like anything else. I mean, comedy is about making people laugh, but if you don't apply yourself to your work, whatever it is that you do, I think that you're going to find it hard to be able to have success. So, I mean, as far as how I wound up becoming a comedian is actually sort of by a strange roundabout route. I just graduated from Brandeis University last summer, so that would be May, 7 months ago. And when I graduated, I got the chance to go on a Fulbright Fellowship, which is a special program run by the State Department where you create a project that has to do with international exchange, and then if you get the grant, they give you about a year to go and do the project. So my project was to go to China and learn about how comedy works and sort of learn what we could find out about China as a culture by studying their comedy. And so because they gave me the chance to do that, I'm in China working as a comedian right now, and I'm actually liking being a comedian. I think I might keep doing it after I'm done.
Now, when you talk about comedy in another culture, do you have to learn a lot about the people themselves before you can actually be a comedian?
Yeah, I think so, because one thing about comedy is that it's a reflection of the culture that you live in. So American culture is one way, so American comedy is the way it is because our culture is the way it is. It's the same thing for comedy in China. You need to understand the way that the culture is there, and you need to understand how your jokes are going to play off in that culture, which is the relevant culture because, if your audience is Chinese people, then if you say jokes that are going to be funny to Americans, then you're not going to get a laugh in China. So it definitely takes one degree of sort of understanding there in the culture. It also takes a degree of recognizing who you are in China, because as a foreigner who's telling jokes in China, people make assumptions about the type of person I am or the type of values that I hold because I don't look Chinese and I'm not speaking Chinese as a first language speaker. So I need to prepare for my audience, and that takes into account both what they think about me and what they think about the jokes themselves.
Now, when you tell your jokes, are you telling them in Chinese or in English?
So I'm performing right now. It's a traditional type of Chinese stand-up comedy. So the content is all in Chinese, and it's called Xiangsheng. And it's a 200-year-old art form, actually, that goes all the way back to Beijing opera is where it comes from. It's sort of an offshoot of Beijing opera. And so the jokes that we tell are in Chinese. They tend to be very linguistically difficult. There are a lot of puns. There's a lot of tongue twisters. There's a lot of very quick go-between. And a good bit of the dialogue is actually improvised. So me and my performer on stage, it's usually two people on stage at one time, we'll be going back and forth with each other. And some of the dialogue that we have is planned out, but a good deal of it will just be going back and forth. I want to tell you a little bit about this. What are you talking about? I don't know if you can handle it. Well, I can handle it. I'm that kind of guy. You're what kind of guy? You're going back and forth doing this humorous dialogue. And a good deal of it's actually improvised.
Now, you're doing this exchange with another person who obviously is Chinese.
Sometimes it's Chinese, although there aren't a ton of other people who are over there studying this traditional art form. But what I did when I got there is I was introduced to a Chinese master performer. And so my master, who I basically apprenticed to, has other students who come from all over the world in order to learn from him as well and do this art form. So my performance partners have been Chinese, but they've also been Japanese and Argentinian and Canadian. And there are a couple other Americans who are studying there as well. So it's a real interesting group of people that are doing this in Beijing right now.
Now, obviously, when you started learning over there in China, did the background you helped that you absorbed here in the United States, was that of any help to you, or did you have to almost go back to square one?
Well, I think there are there are some things where it is helpful to go back to square one to understand another society, to just be able to go there, take your own head out of it, see how people interact, and say that's how people interact, rather than making assumptions how people will react in certain situations. But I think in terms of comedy, what I've sort of found is that while delivery methods will change in different cultures, where there are common points between American and Chinese culture, and there are common points between the culture, where those common points exist, the jokes will actually really translate pretty well. It's just a matter of making sure that you have the proper grammar and the proper delivery style to make sure that it gets a laugh from people. So in terms of content, I mean, the underlying basis about what's funny, having somebody mixing up their logic, or somebody is pretending to be smart when clearly they're stupid, or those sort of underlying gags beneath the actual punchline. Those things actually translate pretty well. But when it comes to, how do you show that if you're trying to pretend you're smart but actually you're stupid, what sort of things do people try to say in one culture to show that they're smart? What sort of things would reveal in one culture that they're stupid? That sort of stuff can change very drastically. So when you see a performance, and if you were to read subtitles of the Chinese performances we do, you may not at first glance sort of understand that the comedic principles underneath are similar, but I find that they generally tend to be more similar than different, and then it's just a matter of sort of figuring out, what is the proper cultural equivalent of somebody who's trying to be smart, somebody who's trying to be silly, those sort of things.
What was it like performing in China for the first time, and did you perform alone or with somebody else?
Well, I had my first big Xiangsheng show doing this sort of traditional comedy style was a group performance. So we had my Chinese master took us to Shandong province, which is about 5 or 6 hours south of Beijing, and we performed on a TV show there as a group. So it was myself and my master, along with several other students. We had a Ukrainian, Vietnamese, Canadian, and there was one more, an Armenian. And we were all together up on the stage, and we had each prepared a small bit. Some people were singing various types of opera. I sung a little piece of Shandong opera, and the other people on the stage were performing some, we'll say, like tongue twisters or something like that. And then we went sort of one by one down our list of performers there, and everybody had a little bit of themselves, and then together we sung a song all at the end. So it was, content-wise, it was not as difficult to prepare for as I thought, because the content that each of us was relied upon to do was, even though we put on a 12-minute show, I only needed to know, say, like 2 minutes of content for my part. In terms of just getting on stage, it was a little, obviously, it was somewhat nerve-wracking because I've practiced these lines. I'm pretty sure I can sing them well, but it's like any other performance. You can practice 100 times, and the only one that matters is the one that happens in front of the audience. So there was that nerve-wracking element to it as well. In terms of the language, I mean, my master has very high standards for the type of performance that he lets to go on stage, so I think that he wouldn't have asked me to go and perform if my language wasn't at the point to do what he wanted to do. And I think that he chose rightly in that, because I had been studying Chinese for, on and off, going back and forth from China, but I've had a full year of intensive Chinese before I went up on stage and performed this type of traditional comedy. And so that really helped in making sure that my language was up to snuff when I went and talked on stage.
Was there ever a time when you performed in China that you said to yourself, what the heck am I doing here?
It was actually, I'll tell you the example of that was, it was not so much on stage, but it was on the bus ride to that performance, where I found myself in the bus. One of the people who was supposed to perform with us had missed the bus and was actually not sure whether he'd be able to make it to the show. So my master turned to me and said, we have two guys on this thing that can do his role. This other guy can't sing a note because he's tone deaf. So Jesse, you need to learn how to sing Sichuan opera and all the other person's lines while we're on the bus. And so, what do you do? The show must go on, right? We've prepared this thing. So I say, okay, and I'm singing. So I realize, it's the strangest road trip ever. I'm sitting here with people from all over the world. My, Chinese master is a 69-year-old Chinese guy who's like saying, like, no, you're singing it all wrong. You don't sound like you're from Sichuan province. You sound like you're from Beijing. Like, go over, do it again. And there was sort of this, like, how did this happen to me? How am I in this place at this time doing this strange thing? But there's definitely some degree of serendipity there. I mean, but I really liked it and I enjoyed it. And in the end, the person who thought that they weren't going to be able to come managed to make it 3 hours before the show. So I was spared from having to do the hastily rehearsed Sichuanese opera on stage in front of the audience. But it was quite an experience.
Do you find that the audience and the Chinese people in general are respectful of you because you've taken the time to learn their language, and now you're taking what you learn and are trying to entertain them? Do they like that? Do they respect you? Do they accept you?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely respect. Respect and acceptance, I suppose, would be a little bit of a different thing. There's definitely respect for foreigners that do that because Chinese people understand that their language is very difficult for native English speakers, certainly, to come in and get up to the high enough level where you can perform something like Xiangsheng, which is very linguistically intensive. So there's definitely a respect factor there. There's also there are a lot of foreigners on Chinese TV, but they're generally, not able to speak Chinese. They're there to sort of sing and dance, and honestly, a lot of times they're not all that great singers and dancers, but they're there because it's entertaining and different than the Chinese performers. So when it comes to seeing people like me who are performing these sort of traditional art forms, it's a respect to Chinese culture that I want to learn about these things, and the content of what we deliver. The content of the pieces themselves are about Chinese history and about Chinese customs, and so it's a tacit acceptance of the culture in that sense, just that we'd be willing to say those things on stage. So I think there's definitely respect. I mean, in terms of an acceptance, I think that's a little bit harder to say. I think that they accept that we like China, which is good. We're definitely not Chinese. That's another. I mean, they'll never. China is not the sort of society that just accepts that if you come here and you study our ways and you live here and you marry a Chinese wife, then you can be Chinese. That's not the way it works at all. So I think that in terms of the ultimate acceptance of like treating us as equals who are like any other performer, I don't think that that's the way that they look at it at all. But at the same time, I'm not Chinese. I grew up in Newton, so they're completely. And I'm not Chinese.
Now, when you talk to people in Chinese, do you have to sort of gauge, what their ages are, their status, and what kind of level of formality you need to speak to these people so that you're being respectful and not disrespectful?
Yeah, obviously it's a complicated social dance when you just talk to people, in any sort of context, because obviously when you're learning a language, at first you just want to be able to express your meaning, and in order to express the meaning, if you wind up speaking a little bit awkwardly, that's all right. But as you get further and you want to really be able to harness those subtleties of speaking to people, like I want to, express I want to treat you as a friend, not as a business contact, or vice versa for that matter. That sort of conversation, it does influence the words you use, it influences the tone that you use, it influences the pace you speak at. It influences the way that you hold your body and how close you stand to them and where you sit, and if you pour for them first or pour for them second, if you're pouring them drinks. It influences all of these things, and so that's where it's. This is when people ask me, like, are you fluent in Chinese? And I'll oftentimes say that I am linguistically fluent, but always not necessarily culturally fluent. Or I'm always making progress on becoming more culturally fluent, but it's sort of a lifetime process to be able to understand all of those subtleties completely.
Do you find that doing what you're doing, being a comedian in China, has helped you as being a better comedian altogether? I mean, Jesse Appell, the comedian, has this kind of made you a better comedian by what you're doing?
I think so. I think that comedy is comedy, and a lot of any sort of performance artist, how many hours can you get in practicing? How many people can you meet that do the same thing that you can learn from? How much time do you consider the topic? If you're on the subway, are you thinking about sports or are you thinking about comedy? The ability to go there and be a comedian, especially under the fellowship, Fulbright giving me a chance to do that, has been amazingly rewarding in my progression as just becoming a better comedian. In terms of whether there's anything on top of that, I think that there is. I think that there's something to be gained from being able to objectively look at culture, because all of our comedy comes from our culture, whether it's a observation about this person did something that was inappropriate and that's funny, or this person has this one particular character quirk and let me tell you about it. But it's only a quirk insofar as you know what's normal, and what's normal in a culture is determined by the people that live there in one country or another. So being able to sort of take your head out of your own culture in order to look back at it definitely helps me highlight parts of America and parts about our own culture that I think are kind of silly. And combined with just the fact that I'm a native English speaker and I have, grew up in American culture and know how to pitch jokes in English, I bet that would make me a better comedian in English, sure.
Is laughter, what was I going to say about laughter? That is it, it's a common thread with everybody. Everybody likes to laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think that's the real value, is that you can discuss a lot of topics through comedy that would be touchy, or perhaps you can't even talk about at all if you were discussing them in, sort of like a general form sense, or just like chatting with people on the street. If you make somebody laugh and you self-deprecate and you say, you know what, I don't take myself too seriously, and then you say something that, the other people they want to match that, and they want to say, well, we don't take ourselves too seriously. We want to have a good time. We want to be able to talk about all these things. And I found that Chinese people are often very interested in asking Americans and people from outside of China questions about more deep than just, oh, do you like Chinese food? People want to get at those questions, but oftentimes will feel they don't want to be rude to foreigners, so they don't ask pointed questions about, like, do you believe the American government did X and X or so and so, and they think that's inappropriate? What do you think about that? People won't ask you that question directly. But once you start to make friends and you laugh with people, and you get into this sort of more amiable environment for conversation, that really opens up a lot of doors that honestly aren't open without laughing. So it does help people with that.
Laughter is certainly it's a universal key to opening up friendships. Now, I'm reading some of the bio information here, and there's thoughts of that you may be trying to start a Chinese version of television Saturday Night Live, which sounds very interesting.
Yeah, we call it Sino Night Live. Something to that degree. I mean, I think right now what's really interesting is that I've been doing this sort of traditional stand-up, this traditional Chinese style. I do improv comedy as well, and there are bilingual improv troupes in Beijing that I perform with. There's all these comedy styles that are sort of that have been around either for hundreds of years or for maybe even just a decade. But I feel like there are very few people between these styles, which is to say that the person who does Xiangsheng, this traditional style, tends to only do Xiangsheng, and the person who does improv doesn't generally study Xiangsheng. And I think that there could be some sort of forum, whether it winds up being a live-style show like Saturday Night Live, or winds up being internet sketches, or winds up being a sitcom. I think there are ways of bringing the styles of jokes from all these different things, from the East and the West, putting them together, and then, of course, it depends what audience you're going for. If you're aiming to broadcast to a Chinese audience, then the content would obviously have to be almost entirely in Chinese and geared towards making Chinese people laugh. But I think that if the content is geared towards China, then the format could perhaps be something like a Saturday Night Live format, which doesn't exist in China right now. Or it could be more improvised in a format that doesn't exist in China right now in the mainstream media. So I think there's a lot of potential like that, and I'm looking forward to developing that in the next year as I finish up my fellowships.
Now, you've also done a parody of the Gangnam Style dancing.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, we did La Wai style, which is foreigner style.
And the song itself, which is over here very popular in the United States. I mean, I don't even know what the guy is saying, but the first time I heard it was a very catchy beat, and he does sneak in some English there. So I thought it was kind of a great thing.
Yeah, it was a really cool thing because before Gangnam Style, you really could ask could something in not English. Korean pop is it's a subgenre. It's not exactly the sort of thing you say, oh, when's the next Korean pop song going to go all over the world? It's a very special situation. I think it shows that, if there's sort of a willingness now from many cultures around the world to consume a certain type of entertainment, and if things are funny and, they're well put together, the type of the beat is catchy, like you said, maybe throw in a little bit of English everywhere so everybody can say, hey, sexy lady, even if they don't know any of the other words to the song. I think there's potential for making those global hits right now that they wouldn't be done before. That being said, me and my friends were talking about this earlier this afternoon. I mean, it's sort of chaotic, though, as to what makes Gangnam Style. I mean, you could deconstruct Gangnam Style as much as you want, and you could go into the sort of like pieces that came into that video, but that doesn't guarantee that if you replicated them, you would be able to make another Gangnam Style.
Right. Well, so, it's very popular, and Americans dance to it any way they want to. So I guess it's
and in China as well. Obviously, yeah. I mean, the success of my parody video, I think, is in very large part due to the fact that people like listening to the Gangnam Style song so much that they're willing to listen to these parodies as well. And so that was great in terms of being able to get the message that I want to get across in my video about being a foreigner in China and the types of sort of a combat of some of the stereotypes that Chinese people think of foreigners.
Well, Jesse, we're just about out of time, but we could go on and on about this. But it's been a pleasure talking with you. And do you have a website where people can go in and see what you're doing and what's going on?
Yeah, I do. Well, we actually just launched this week. It's called www.laughbeijing.com. And you can see all sorts of stuff about the comedy project that I'm doing, about the traditional art form that I'm studying, examples of my sketches that are, funny to Chinese people. Maybe they're funny to Americans as well. And see the sorts of stuff that I've been up to, and contact me if you have any information. My email's on the website. It's laughbeijing.com.
Well, I suggest you go in there. Jesse is, a Newton resident, and he's really broadened the horizons. And I think in laughter you bring a lot of people together, and that's what Jesse is doing. Because everybody, if you can't laugh at yourself, I mean,
yeah,
it's always fun. I laugh at myself all the time. It's great medicine.
Yep.
And that's what Jesse's doing, getting people to not only laugh, but laugh at themselves, not take things too seriously, always step back a little bit. And again, Jesse Appell, a comedian, a great one, and a Newton resident. And Jesse, it was a pleasure having you here on 1550 today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a great time.
And good luck and all the best to you.
All right. Thank you very much.
And we'll be back right after this.